case, I was thinking about the relationship between handwriting and personality. Of course, I would think about this, I would perceive this as correlation. It's not a causal effect relationship, but it's some kind of correlation. If you write in a certain way, that probably means you have certain personality. And if you have certain personality, you tend to write in a certain way. So that's a correlational relation, right? Correlation. And I also think about this as prototype. Prototype. In other words, there are always typical people who fit in this category, with certain handwriting and certain personality. And there are other peripheral cases or exceptions, right? That's why the idea of prototype is also important when you interpret the relationship between handwriting and personality. There are always exceptions, even though 64% of the population might fit in this kind of category, this kind of prediction. Okay? The next thing is in the video, before I talk about the video, in that case, Zobater mentioned a letter W. Probably some of you didn't catch the explanation of W. Right? In that case, the mad bomber who wrote W like this. Okay, so in other words, they interpreted the shape of W as two round balls. So that means this person probably loved his mother, or remembered his mother, or missed his mother. That's the interpretation of the writing of W. Right? And then back to that video clip you saw, the video clip. The woman, or I don't know if she's a linguist, she's probably a linguist or a graphologist, who wrote two letters, H and G, and she said, this round thing, pointing to the future, whereas this circle pointing to the past. Of course, that's a perception of history from a very Western point of view. Westerners view history linearly, right? From left to right. A Western historian would view history as moving linearly, 线性的, linear, from left to right. That's why left represents the past and right represents the future, right? According to a very Western way of thinking. But in an Asian way of viewing history, it may not be linear. We might think it's circular, right? We might think, history may repeat itself. So it's not just linear all the way going to the future, and it will never come back. But we probably, Oriental or Asian way of viewing history might be a little different. And also, what is forward? What is backward? What is front? What is back? What is future and past? In our language, may be different from English. For example, when we say last year, when we say the day before yesterday, the day before yesterday, and the day after tomorrow. Okay, just think about these two expressions in Chinese. The day before yesterday. What is it? The day before yesterday. 前天. And the word 前 is front or back? Front. 前 is front. And the day after tomorrow is 后天. And 后 means back, right? Means back. 后. In other words, it's past. Do you see the differences between the day before yesterday and the day after tomorrow? And you compare the expressions with orientation, spatial orientation, front versus back. If front is future, back is past, then the day before yesterday and the day after tomorrow are exactly the opposite. That's why a lot of Westerners who are learning Chinese have trouble, great difficulty in using these two expressions. So that's another thing I want to point out as a linguist. When she interpreted, this is future and this is past, and immediately the distinction, of time words came to my mind. So it's a very cultural interpretation. In other words, when you interpret signs, it's important who you come from, where you come from, who you are, what is your cultural background. That will influence the way you interpret W, H, and G. How big this G is, where this circle is, which direction it points at. All right, so that's just my reflection on their case. Okay, now I'm going to also talk about, what else should I talk about related to this case? Not really much, because they already showed the game, and I should add some background information for you to write about this case, I think. All right. Chapter 6. Okay, so we are going to look at chapter 6 and chapter 7 today. Because originally, when I look at their case, I thought they're going to talk about forensic phonetics or forensic phonology, but it turned out to be very different. They decided to work on handwriting instead of phonetics and phonology, but that's okay. That aspect is discussed in chapter 7, although it's not discussed in detail because graphology is not really the core linguistics, right? That's why in chapter 7, it's just briefly discussed. But fortunately, this group presented in detail and also showed Roger Schei's analysis of a ransom note. And Roger Schei's analysis is not just on handwriting, but on linguistic features. So you already drew some evidence from that ransom note on the educational background and whereabouts of this person, right? You already did some analysis. It's not just focused on handwriting. Okay, so let's look at the work of the forensic linguist. This chapter summarizes very well what forensic linguistics is all about. Basically, this chapter gives you the linguist's toolkit, right? When you solve a problem, you need a tool. You need the right tool to solve a problem. So, for example, we have phonetic and phonological problems, morphological, syntactic, lexical, discoursal, textual, and pragmatic problems. Discoursal problem refers to spoken data. Textual problem is the example you just talked about, that ransom note, right? Ransom note, that's a textual problem. You look at the text and decide the features in this text. You also have pragmatic problem. In other words, is this person cooperative or not? Okay, is this person, does this person talk too much or too little? Does he say things irrelevant or relevant? How do you know this is relevant? And if it's irrelevant, what is the meaning? Can you draw any implicatures or inferences from his being irrelevant? Even when someone is being irrelevant, you want to draw some conclusion. What's the relevance here, right? I remember a lot of times when I gave assignments or show some video clips, many students say, what's the connection between, say, sexual harassment and C.C. McDonald, right? Because you want to see the relevance. And what's the connection between the video North Country and C.C. McDonald, right? You want to draw some kind of connection, make a connection. And if there's no relevance, you have two conclusions. Either this professor is just crazy, she doesn't know what she's doing, or you are stupid, right? Because you don't know what the connection is. So either way, you have to find fault. Whose fault is this? All right, I'm not finding fault now. Let's just look at some examples. Phonetic phonology examples, we already looked at bomb thread caller a few weeks ago, remember? Bomb thread caller, okay? Now, if we look at morphological examples, this is also has been introduced, right? McSleep versus McDonald, the Mc prefix, that's a morphological problem. And there are also phonetic similarity cases in Roger Shai's Linguistic Battles in Trademark Disputes. Three groups are going to talk about trademark disputes, and a lot of examples are related to phonetic similarity. For example, iPhone versus iPhone, right? Yahoo versus Yahoo. These are all phonetic similarity. And then linguists can also help resolve syntactic problem. For example, a woman, an old lady who's very upset about the government's using complicated forms. When you have to fill out some forms, it's just impossible to know, to interpret the forms and interpret the law. So you know when to file the complaint or when to file your case. In this case, does anybody, Michelle Lin, can you read this for us? This is something for the old lady to read, but it's very hard to understand. That's why she later sued the government. Can you read it?
If your AFDC financial assistance benefits are continued at the present level and the fair hearing decides your AFDC financial assistance reduction was correct, the amount of AFDC assistance received to which you were not entitled will be recouped from future AFDC payments, or you must be paid back if your AFDC is canceled.
Right. It's very complex. And basically, what does it say? Those future lawyers, we have two future judges or lawyers, Xiao Chunfang and Fang Ziyun. They may be future judges, prosecutors, or lawyers. Okay. If you translate the syntactic complexity in the letter, it's essentially the following equivalent reformulation. In other words, you are looking at if X, Y, Z, then if X, then Y. It's essentially that formula. If X happens and then Y happens, then either Z will happen expressed in very complex terms, including a negative with a relative clause, or if R has also happened, then Q must happen. So a linguist can help this lady to translate the complicated syntax into something. If something happens, then Q must happen. This essentially, follows the formula. Okay, next. Now I also have a game for you. This game is try to disambiguate lexical grammatical meaning. All right, here's a case. Let me see. Okay, who would like to help me to read the case? Joe?
Captain report on the appeal which went to the Supreme Court
Supreme Court.
in 1994. The facts that are as follows.
Okay.
A certain Mr. Broderson pleaded guilty to a charge of destroying mail. For each, the maximum custodial sentence was 6 months in prison. Although there was the option of a fine post probation.
Okay, let's stop here. We have a Mr. Granderson, who pleaded guilty to a charge of destroying mail. He's guilty because he destroyed some mail. And then the maximum custodial sentence was 6 months in prison. Either 6 months in prison or pay a fine plus probation for how long? For 5 years. For 5 years, that's 6 months. Okay? So now we have a math problem. It's not really a math problem, it's a linguistic problem. And we will see what's the decision of the judge, okay? And then what's the linguist decision to help the person who was sentenced more than what he's supposed to. Remember the 2 options? One is how many months? 6 months. That's the first option. Or what's the second option? Fine. Pay a fine. Okay? Pay a fine. And plus, how long is the probation? 5 years. How many months? 60 months. Okay. Now, something happened. First of all, the judge chose the latter. Chose what? Number 2. The judge chose the latter. He fined Mr. Granderson and put him on probation for 5 years. That is 60 months. But the story is not over. What happened? Subsequently, Mr. Granderson violated his probation by being caught in possession of cocaine. He's a drug addict. He was caught in possession of cocaine. In such cases, the law instructs the court to revoke the sentence of probation and sentence the defendant to not less than 1/3 of the original sentence. 1/3 of the original sentence. Okay, 1/3 of the original sentence. Now, what is the original sentence? What's the original sentence? That's the question here. What's the original sentence? This presented the court with a problem because if it took original sentence to refer to probation, imposing a sentence of not less than 1/3, that is, 1/3 of 60 months is how many? 20 months, right? Okay, where's 20 months? Here. Okay, then it could in fact reduce the penalty, as he had not yet served 40 months of his probation yet. In the end, it was decided to sentence him to 20 months in jail. That's the final decision, is 20 months. Okay, 20 months in jail. 20 months in jail.